Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old porch swing groaned a familiar rhythm, a sound as much a part of my late sister Carol's house as the scent of honeysuckle climbing the railings. It was a sound that usually brought comfort, a reminder of lazy summer afternoons and shared secrets. But today, each creak seemed to tighten the knot in my stomach. Bobby, Carol's husband, my brother-in-law, was inside, probably wondering why I'd insisted on waiting out here. He'd be polite, of course. Bobby was always polite. That was part of the problem. It had been 3 years since we lost Carol to the cancer that had stolen her light too soon. 3 years of navigating this strange, tender space around Bobby. He was family, the closest thing I had left to my sister, a walking, breathing embodiment of so many shared memories. But somewhere along the way, through the shared grief, the quiet dinners where we'd reminisce, the way he'd look at me sometimes, like he was searching for a piece of Carol in my eyes, well, things had gotten complicated. For me anyway. I'm Tiffany, by the way. 48, a librarian, which sounds quiet and predictable, and mostly it is. My life was a well-ordered catalog of books and routines until Carol got sick. Then everything tilted. Bobby and I, we were thrown together, leaning on each other. He needed support, and I guess I needed to feel needed, to hold on to a part of my sister by being there for the man she loved. The complication wasn't some torrid, hidden affair. Heavens no. It was quieter, more insidious. It was the way my heart did a little flip when he'd smile in that unguarded way he rarely did anymore. It was the warmth that spread through me when his hand brushed mine as we both reached for a photo album. It was the ridiculous, teenage daydreaming I found myself doing, imagining a life that wasn't mine to dream about. He was my sister's husband. And even though she was gone, that fact was a wall, high and unscalable. Or it should have been. This weekend was the annual town fair, something Carol had adored. Bobby had been hesitant to go the first year after she passed, but I gently coaxed him. Last year it had felt different. We'd laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in what felt like ages. He'd won a stuffed bear at a ring toss game, a silly, oversized purple thing, and given it to me with a shy smile that made my breath catch. I still had it, tucked away in my closet like a forbidden treasure. That bear was a symbol of the growing tenderness I felt, a tenderness that was starting to feel a lot like, well, I couldn't even say the word to myself. It felt disloyal to Carol, to her memory. And what if Bobby felt nothing of the sort? What if he was just being kind, leaning on his sister-in-law, the only other person who understood the depth of his loss? The thought of him finding out, of him looking at me with pity or, worse, revulsion, was unbearable. So I'd come up with a plan. A crazy, desperate, probably stupid plan. The kind of plan you only hatch when you feel like you're backed into a corner with no way out. I'd read an article a few weeks ago about selective amnesia, usually brought on by trauma. A little bump on the head, a moment of disorientation. My cousin, bless her dramatic soul, had once faked a brief bout of amnesia in high school to get out of a history exam she hadn't studied for. It had almost worked. My plan was more specific. I wasn't going to forget everything. Just Bobby. Or rather, the last few years. I'd still remember Carol, of course. I'd remember Bobby as her husband, a more distant figure. The tender moments, the shared grief that had somehow morphed into this confusing affection for me. Those would be wiped clean. I'd be able to interact with him, be the supportive sister-in-law, without this agonizing undercurrent of emotion. It was a way to protect myself, to protect him from my foolish heart, and to preserve Carol's memory untainted. The screen door creaked open, and Bobby stepped onto the porch. He was holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, his voice soft. He was a good-looking man, Bobby. Always had been in that rugged, unassuming way. His dark hair was showing a little gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before Carol's illness. They were lines of grief, of worry, but they didn't detract from his kindness. If anything, they made him seem more real, more approachable. Too approachable, for my peace of mind. "Thanks, Bobby," I said, taking a glass. My hand trembled slightly. This was it. The fair was tomorrow. My plan was to stage a small, believable accident. Nothing too dramatic. A little fall, a bump to the head, and then a fresh start. Or so I hoped. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the sprawling oak tree in the front yard. The one Carol had insisted on planting their first year here. You okay, Tiff? You seem a little quiet today. There it was, that gentle concern in his voice that could unravel me. Just thinking, I said, trying for a casual tone. About Carol. About the fair. He nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. Yeah, me too. Still feels strange going without her. It does, I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. The guilt was already starting to churn. This was a terrible idea. Deceitful. Manipulative even. But what was the alternative? Confess my feelings and risk destroying the fragile peace we'd found? Risk him pulling away, leaving me completely alone with my grief and my inappropriate affection? I took a long sip of iced tea, the cold liquid doing nothing to cool the anxiety burning in my chest. He was looking at me, a question in his eyes. The kind of look that made me feel like he could see right through me. Maybe he already knew. Maybe my feelings weren't as hidden as I thought. The idea sent a fresh wave of panic through me. No, I had to do this. For Carol. For Bobby. For my own sanity. Tomorrow I'd stumble. Tomorrow I'd forget. Tomorrow hopefully things would get easier. Or at least simpler. I just prayed I wouldn't make everything a whole lot worse. The porch swing continued its mournful creak, a soundtrack to my desperate, foolish hope. The morning of the fair dawned bright and painfully clear. The kind of late spring day that practically hummed with life. Birds sang with an almost aggressive cheerfulness, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and distant blooming roses. It felt like the world was mocking my gloomy resolve. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning, replaying the plan in my head until every detail was worn smooth with anxiety. Bobby picked me up around 10. He was wearing a faded blue polo shirt and jeans, looking relaxed, almost boyish. It was a look that tugged at something deep inside me, a reminder of simpler times, before illnesses and unspoken feelings had cast their long shadows. Ready for some funnel cake and questionable life choices on the tilt-a-whirl? He joked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I forced a smile. As I'll ever be. My purse felt heavy on my lap, not because of its contents, but because of the weight of my secret. I'd chosen my spot already, a slightly uneven patch of ground near the petting zoo, often crowded, a little chaotic. A trip there wouldn't look too out of place. A small stumble, a cry of surprise, a hand to my head. I'd practiced the fall in my living room last night, feeling utterly ridiculous but determined. We walked through the colorful, noisy entrance of the fairgrounds, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy thick in the air. Children shrieked with delight on the carousel, calliope music clashing with the twang of a country band from a nearby stage. It was a cacophony of joy, and I felt like an imposter, a dark cloud in a sky full of sunshine. Bobby seemed genuinely happy to be there, pointing out the different stalls, reminiscing about past fairs with Carol. Remember that year Carol tried to win that giant frog? She must have spent $50 on those darn darts, he chuckled, shaking his head. And she still made you carry it around all day when she finally won it, I added, the memory bringing a genuine smile to my face. These were the moments I cherished, the easy camaraderie. But they were also the moments that twisted the knife, reminding me of what I was trying to erase, or at least reconfigure. As we neared the petting zoo, my heart began to pound. This was it. The ground was just as I remembered, a little lumpy with loose gravel. A few families were milling about, kids darting between parents' legs. Perfect. I took a deep breath, feigning a sudden interest in a particularly fluffy sheep. Oh, look at that one, Bobby, I exclaimed, taking a step towards the enclosure, deliberately placing my foot on an unsteady patch. And then I let myself fall. It was more awkward than I'd anticipated. Not a graceful stumble, but more of a clumsy lurch. My ankle twisted, and I went down with a genuine yelp of pain, my hands flying out to break my fall. My head didn't hit the ground as hard as I'd theatrically imagined, but it did connect with a thud. For a moment, lying there on the dusty ground, the smell of hay and animal feed in my nostrils, I felt a surge of pure panic. What if I'd actually hurt myself? Tiffany. Bobby was by my side in an instant, his voice sharp with alarm. Are you all right? His hands were on my shoulders, gentle but firm. I blinked, looking up at him, trying to summon the confused, dazed expression I'd practiced. Bobby, I murmured, letting my eyes go slightly unfocused. What happened? You fell, Tiff. You tripped. He looked genuinely worried, his brow furrowed. Did you hit your head hard? I touched my head gingerly. I think so. It's a bit fuzzy. This was the crucial part. I focused on his face, trying to inject a note of polite, distant recognition. I'm sorry, you're Bobby, right? Carol's husband. The concern on his face deepened, mingled now with a flicker of something else. Confusion? Disbelief? Yeah, Tiff. It's me, Bobby. He paused, his gaze searching mine. Are you kidding me? I winced as if trying to remember. Kidding? No, why would I be kidding? I pushed myself up slowly, wincing again. This time for real because my ankle was definitely throbbing. My head just really hurts. Everything's a bit jumbled. He helped me to a nearby bench, his arm supporting me. I leaned into him, just for a moment, telling myself it was part of the act, that I needed the support. But his closeness was both a comfort and a fresh stab of guilt. He was so quick to care, so genuinely concerned. And I was repaying him with this charade. Maybe we should get you to the first aid tent, he said, his voice tight with worry. Or even the hospital. No, I insisted, perhaps a little too quickly. I'm sure it's just a little bump. I just need a minute. Things are swimming a bit. I looked around, feigning disorientation. This fair, it's lovely. Carol always loved the fair. Bobby was watching me, his expression unreadable. Yeah, she did, he said slowly. Tiff, do you remember coming here with me? Before? Last year, for instance. I frowned, pretending to search my memory. With you? I don't think so, Bobby. I mean, I remember Carol talking about it, how much fun you two had. But I don't think I've ever been here with you. Was I supposed to? The look he gave me then was one I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger or disbelief anymore. It was something quieter, more thoughtful. And it made me more uneasy than any accusation could have. He stayed silent for a long moment, just looking at me, and I had the sudden, unnerving feeling that my carefully constructed plan was already starting to unravel in ways I hadn't anticipated. The knot in my stomach tightened. This was supposed to make things simpler, not more complicated. But as I sat there, feigning a hazy memory, I had a sinking feeling that I'd just opened a door to something I couldn't control. Bobby finally broke the silence. Okay, Tiff. Okay. He said it softly, and there was an odd gentleness in his tone. Let's just sit here for a bit. And then, maybe we can get you some water. He didn't push. He didn't question me further. He just accepted it. Or seemed to. This wasn't how I'd pictured it. I'd expected more confusion from him, more frantic questioning, maybe even a call to a doctor, or my non-existent emergency contact for amnesia. His calm acceptance was unsettling. It made me feel like I was the one being observed, my reactions carefully noted. The subtle tension I'd hoped to alleviate by forgetting him seemed to have only shifted, coiling around us in a new and unfamiliar way. He bought me a bottle of water from a nearby vendor, his movements unhurried. When he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine, and I flinched, a purely involuntary reaction. I quickly covered it by wincing and touching my head again. Still a bit sensitive, I mumbled. He nodded, his eyes missing nothing. Take it easy. No rush. He sat beside me again, not too close, but not too far either. Just present. So, he began, his tone casual, conversational. If you don't remember being here with me before, what do you remember about? Well, about me lately? This was the test. I had to be consistent. Well, you're Carol's husband, I repeated, as if that was the sum total of his identity in my mind. I remember seeing you at family things, holidays, before Carol got sick. You were always kind. Quiet, mostly. I tried to picture him as he had been then, more in the background of my life. A pleasant but not central figure. And after Carol passed? He prompted gently. I hesitated, looking down at my hands. This was harder. How much grief should I remember sharing with this new version of Bobby? I remember the funeral, I said, my voice genuinely catching a little, because that, at least, was a raw and real memory. And I suppose we must have seen each other. Grief does that, doesn't it? Throws people together. I looked up at him, trying to convey a sense of polite, slightly distant sympathy. It must have been incredibly hard for you. For all of us, but especially for you. He watched me, his head tilted slightly. It was, he agreed quietly. And you were a great help, Tiff. To me. You were there. Well, of course, I said, trying to sound like it was the most natural thing in the world. The expected duty of a sister-in-law. Carol was my sister. I avoided saying, "You're my brother-in-law, and I care about you." Instead, I kept the focus on Carol, the safe, undeniable connection. The minutes stretched. The sounds of the fair, the music, the laughter, the distant rumble of rides, seemed to fade into a muted backdrop for our strange, stilted conversation. I had expected to feel a sense of relief with this faked amnesia, a lifting of the burden of my secret affections. Instead, I felt exposed. And incredibly lonely. I was creating a distance between us, yes, but it was an artificial one. And it felt hollow. So, Bobby said after a while, his voice still mild. What do you feel like doing? We don't have to stay at the fair if your head hurts. I can take you home. No, I said, perhaps a little too quickly. Leaving now would feel like a failure, an admission that the bump was more serious. And a part of me, the foolish, traitorous part, didn't want to leave his company, even under these false pretenses. The fresh air is nice. Maybe we could just walk a bit? Slowly. Sure, he said, his expression unreadable. Whatever you're comfortable with. He stood up and offered me his hand. I looked at it for a moment. Taking his hand now felt different. Before, it would have been a casual gesture between friends, between family. Now, under the guise of my amnesia, it felt like a lifeline offered by a near stranger, someone I was supposed to be keeping at arm's length. But my ankle did genuinely hurt from the fall, a dull ache spreading up my calf. I took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, reassuring. We walked slowly, aimlessly, through the less crowded pathways of the fair. He didn't press me with more questions about my memory. Instead, he pointed things out, almost like a tour guide showing a newcomer around. They always have the best pies at that stall over there, he'd say. Or, Carol loved watching the log flume, though she'd never go on it herself. He kept bringing up Carol. It was clever, in a way. It reinforced my role as her sister, reminding me of the lines I myself had drawn. But it also felt poignant. He was talking about his late wife to me, his sister-in-law who supposedly didn't remember their more recent, deeper connection. It was as if he was testing me, seeing how I'd react, or perhaps he was trying to gently coax my memories back. We paused by a small, quiet garden area tucked away behind the main thoroughfare, a little oasis with a few benches and some wilting flower beds. Let's sit here for a moment, he suggested. As I sat down, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, not just from the physical act of the fall, but from the mental strain of maintaining the charade. It was like holding a complex yoga pose for too long. Every muscle, every nerve, was screaming in protest. Bobby sat beside me, leaving a respectful distance. He picked up a small, smooth stone from the path and turned it over and over in his fingers. You know, Tiff, he said, his voice thoughtful. Memories are funny things. Sometimes we remember things we wish we could forget. And sometimes we forget things we should remember. My breath hitched. Was he suspicious? Was this his gentle way of calling me out? I looked at his profile. His expression was serious, almost sad. I suppose they are. I managed, my voice thinner than I intended. It's unsettling, not knowing what's real in your own head. He turned to look at me then, his gaze direct and searching. If there was something important you'd forgotten about us, about our friendship, would you want to remember it? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and loaded. This was the crux of it, wasn't it? My desperate attempt to forget was a direct answer to that question. No, I didn't want to remember, because remembering hurt too much. But I couldn't say that. Not to this version of Bobby, the one I was pretending barely knew me beyond a familial tie. I looked away, towards the faded blooms in the flower bed. I don't know, Bobby, I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all day. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, isn't it? Maybe some memories are best left undisturbed. He was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the distant calliope music and the chirping of a lone cricket. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Maybe, he said. Or maybe those undisturbed memories are the ones that hold the key to something important. Something worth finding again. His words, so gentle, so understanding, were like a tiny crack appearing in the wall I'd built around my heart. I had faked amnesia to forget him, to simplify my feelings, to protect myself. But as I sat there beside him, surrounded by the muted sounds of the fair, I had the distinct and terrifying feeling that I was on the verge of discovering something far more complex and far more significant than I had ever bargained for. The subtle tension had not disappeared. It had transformed into a quiet, potent curiosity, a sense that this unexpected path might lead somewhere I hadn't dared to imagine. We didn't stay at the fair much longer after that. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and my head, genuinely this time, was starting to ache with a dull throb, a sympathetic pain to my still tender ankle. Bobby was solicitous, careful, never once challenging my story, yet his eyes, when they met mine, seemed to hold a depth of understanding that unnerved me more than any accusation could have. The drive back to my small house was quiet. Not an uncomfortable silence, not anymore, but a thoughtful one. I found myself stealing glances at him, at his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. Who was this man really? I had constructed an image of him in my mind, colored by my grief, my sister's memory, and my own complicated feelings. The Bobby I was interacting with now, through the filter of my faked amnesia, felt different. Calmer perhaps. More observant. Or maybe I was the one who was different, stripped of the familiar anxieties that usually clouded my perception of him. When we pulled into my driveway, he cut the engine and turned to me. "Are you sure you're going to be okay, Tiff? I can come in, make you some tea, make sure you're settled." The old Tiffany, the one who remembered everything, would have either politely declined or, if she were feeling particularly vulnerable, might have accepted, craving the comfort of his presence. The new Tiffany, the amnesiac, had to think what her reaction should be. "Oh no, thank you, Bobby," I said, trying for a tone of polite gratitude. "I'll be fine. Just need to rest, I think. Thank you for everything today. For your help." "Anytime, Tiff," he said, and his smile was gentle. "That's what friends are for, right? Or family, anyway." He paused. "Even if some of the details are a bit hazy for you right now." There it was again, that subtle acknowledgement of my condition, without any pressure. It was disarming. I fumbled for my purse. "Well, good night then, Bobby." "Good night, Tiff." He waited until I was at my front door, key in hand, before starting the car and pulling away. I watched his taillights disappear down the street. A strange mix of relief, and an even stranger sense of loss. I had wanted distance, and I was getting it. But it wasn't the clean break I'd imagined. It was something far more nuanced. Inside my quiet house, the silence felt heavier than usual. I sank onto the sofa, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The fall, the feigned confusion, Bobby's reaction, his unexpected gentleness, his probing yet kind questions. He hadn't behaved at all like I'd anticipated. I'd expected him to be flustered, perhaps a little annoyed, or at the very least, thoroughly confused and insistent on medical intervention. Instead, he'd been patient, understanding almost, as if he were willing to play along with my bizarre charade, for reasons I couldn't fathom. Could he know? Could he suspect it was a lie? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. If he did, why wasn't he angry? Why wasn't he confronting me? This quiet acceptance, this gentle handling of my supposed condition, was far more unsettling than outright disbelief would have been. It made me feel like I was the one being carefully managed, my every word and action weighed. I replayed his words in the garden. Sometimes we forget things we should remember. Maybe those undisturbed memories are the ones that hold the key to something important. It felt like he was speaking in code, sending me a message I wasn't quite equipped to decipher. Or maybe I was overthinking everything, my guilt and anxiety projecting meaning onto innocent words. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. I called in sick to the library on Monday, claiming a mild concussion from my fall, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head did feel a bit muddled, though more from stress than impact. Bobby called to check on me each day. Brief, polite calls. He'd ask how I was feeling, if I needed anything. He didn't mention the fair or my memory loss, beyond asking if things were any clearer. I kept my answers vague. A little better, thanks. Still a bit foggy. I tried to sound like someone genuinely recovering from a minor head injury. Someone who was perhaps a little embarrassed by her lapse in memory concerning a familiar face. During one call, he said, "You know, Carol left a bunch of old photo albums at my place. Some of them go way back, to when you two were kids. Maybe looking through them sometime might help. No pressure, just a thought." My heart squeezed. Photo albums. Memories of Carol. That was safe territory. But looking at them with Bobby, under this pretense, it felt like walking a tightrope. That's a kind offer, Bobby," I said slowly. "Maybe when I'm feeling a bit more myself." "Sure thing," he replied, his voice even. "Just let me know." The more I interacted with this new Bobby, the more I realized how much my perception of him had been shaped by my own internal turmoil. I had been so consumed by my own inappropriate feelings, my guilt, my fear of rejection, that I hadn't really seen him clearly. I'd seen him as an extension of my sister, then as an object of my conflicted affections, a source of potential pain. But this Bobby, the one who was patiently navigating my supposed amnesia, was showing me a different side. A side that was deeply considerate, surprisingly insightful, and possessed of an almost unnerving calm. It was as if my bizarre plan, intended to create distance, was instead forcing a new kind of intimacy, a carefully choreographed dance where we were both acutely aware of every step. By the end of the week, I was a wreck of confused emotions. The amnesia charade was exhausting. Lying to someone who was being nothing but kind felt increasingly despicable. The relief I'd hoped for was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was this growing awareness, this uncomfortable sense that I'd stumbled into something far more profound than a simple solution to an awkward crush. I found myself thinking about his words in the garden again. Something worth finding again. What if he wasn't just talking about my lost memories of him? What if he was hinting at something else? A chance for a different kind of connection, perhaps? One built not on the ashes of grief and unspoken desires, but on something new? The thought was both terrifying and strangely alluring. My faked amnesia had been a desperate attempt to run away from my feelings, to reset a dynamic that felt unsustainable. But what if, in doing so, I had inadvertently opened a door to a different path entirely? A path that required not forgetting, but a different kind of remembering? A more honest kind of seeing? One evening, about a week after the fair, there was a soft knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the curtains. Bobby's car was parked at the curb. He was standing on my porch, holding a small, flat box. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door, trying to look mildly surprised, pleasantly so. "Bobby, what a surprise." "Hi, Tiff," he said, a small, almost shy smile on his face. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. I was going through some of Carol's things, like I mentioned. And I found this. I thought you might like to see it." He held out the box. It was an old, slightly worn photo album, one I didn't immediately recognize. My carefully constructed amnesiac persona wavered. This was it. He was calling my bluff, perhaps. Or offering an olive branch. Or maybe, just maybe, he was genuinely trying to help the confused woman he thought I was. The ambiguity was dizzying. I took the box, my fingers brushing his. This time I didn't flinch. "Thank you, Bobby," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "That's very thoughtful of you." I hesitated, then made a decision. The charade couldn't last forever. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. Would you like to come in? Maybe we could look at it together." His smile widened just a fraction, but it reached his eyes, warming them. "I'd like that very much, Tiff," he said. And as he stepped inside, I had the distinct feeling that the real story, the one that wasn't about faked amnesia but about genuine connection, was only just beginning. The air between us felt charged, not with the old, anxious tension, but with a sense of quiet anticipation, a feeling that we were on the cusp of an important discovery together.